and Steak, an introduction to the cinema of DJ Higgins.
Thank you, Alice. Let's see if I can find my PowerPoint here. Oh, sorry. No, it's looks like it's probably me. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I cannot tell you what a pleasure it is for me to be back here at my beloved alma mater after nearly 2 years away, sharing art and hopes and ideas with so many of my esteemed friends and colleagues in this beautiful space. My heartfelt thanks, of course, go out to my professors Antonio Vitti and Andrea Ciccarelli for their continued mentorship and friendship and for organizing this wonderful event, and that's not just lip service, it really is wonderful, and for allowing me to be a part of it. So this year I'm going to be focusing on the works of a young Italian-American filmmaker who is also one of my very closest friends, DJ Higgins. I would like to preface everything that I'm about to say with the recognition that a personal sort of emotional bond can impede a critic's ability to objectively evaluate an artist's work. On the other hand, though, I also believe that a sort of a deep first-hand knowledge of an artist's biography, his psychological nuances, aesthetic fetishes, and so on, worldview, can prove extremely helpful in deciphering the semiotic universe of a given artist. And it is in the spirit of this conviction that I hope to provide you with some useful insight into the artistic project of this filmmaker who is perhaps controversial, but undeniably dynamic. Let's see. I really wanted to cover at least 2 of Higgins' films today, but time constraints, I did the practice run-through, just won't allow for it. So I will begrudgingly be limiting myself to just one of his films, Pasquale's Magic Veal, which I will analyze to at least begin making the argument that we must understand Higgins primarily as a fiercely and unflinchingly dialectical filmmaker who gives space and consideration to opposing, often mutually exclusive viewpoints in regards to fundamental questions of lifestyle and identity, and in particular questions of love, marriage, and relationships, traditional Catholic values versus contemporary consumer. I meant to write here contemporary, I would say consumerism more than anything else. And Italian and Italian-American identity, which I won't have time to get into in my talk, but hopefully can expand upon either during Q&A or as we are enjoying cocktails and those, what are those, spanakoppitas and the other fried items that we'll be enjoying over the next few evenings. Anyway, I will show that Higgins' cinematic universe is one in which viable solutions to fundamental lifestyle and identity crises, namely crises pertaining to marriage and religion, do not exist. And yet, it is humor in his poetics that is the vehicle that edifies us and enables us to face these unsolvable problems with courage and strength and with love. So Higgins released Pasquale's Magic Veal in 2016. This film features Vincent Pastore, best known for his role as Big Pussy in The Sopranos, Joe D'Onofrio, who had roles in Bronx Tale and Goodfellas, and Dan Grimaldi, also known for his role in The Sopranos. Now, I'm going to assume, of course, that most of you have not seen this film, and it is therefore necessary, I say unfortunately, because it's going to take a little bit of time, but I do need to give you a bit of a synopsis of the story before I begin to analyze it. So this 20-minute cortometraggio tells the story of Francine, a young woman who has taken her lifelong boyfriend to discuss their upcoming marriage with her priest at an Italian restaurant in New York City. At this counseling session of sorts, the priest, who presents as a wise, worldly, and sincere man, attempts to explain to the couple that a Catholic marriage must be taken seriously because it constitutes a bond between the spouses and God. It is an inviolable commitment that requires patience, love, lifelong devotion, and fidelity. He insists that this kind of marriage, with its profound implications for the lives of the children that will likely be born under it, should not be entered into unless both parties are absolutely sure that they are ready for a real, serious, lifelong commitment. While Francine listens eagerly and intently, we quickly determine that her fiancé, Rocco, is a cartoonishly vulgar figure. He chews with his mouth open. He brashly extols his own virility. He speaks in a grammatically impoverished New York slang. He declares that he is marrying Francine because she has been pressuring him to do so, and asserts his refusal to take advice on love and on sex from a guy who, quote, hasn't been laid in 15 years. The priest, exacerbated with Rocco's obstinance, enlists Pasquale, the mysterious chef in the kitchen, to perform a magical spell on a piece of tender veal before serving it to Rocco. Once he takes a bite, Rocco falls into a temporary trance, wherein he is compelled to tell the truth about any question that she asks him. And it is thus revealed that he has cheated on her numerous times, that he is marrying her not because he loves her, but because he is afraid of facing life on his own, growing old alone, and dying alone. Francine takes her ring off and storms out, and the film concludes with Pasquale and the priest toasting to their having saved another one. So, I'm going to begin by analyzing the dialectical treatment of love, relationships, and marriage in this piece. As I see it, the film presents three lifestyle choices, all of which are wrought with difficulties, contradictions, and implicit challenges that are effectively impossible to overcome. The first lifestyle choice is living single, being accountable to oneself, limiting one's romantic life to casual, non-commitment-based encounters. In his response to Rocco's charge that a man who hasn't been laid in 15 years is not qualified to give sex or love advice, the priest responds, and I'm quoting, "I wasn't always a priest. I sowed my oats in college. Before my conversion, I was unhappy. I didn't understand that loving someone meant sacrifice, patience, and asking yourself some very serious questions, the most important of which are about family. When we think about marriage, we often focus on ourselves, and that's where we get off track," end quote. So here we have the figure with the most gravitas, the most sort of credibility in the economy of the film, professing the emptiness of a former life that he himself lived, living unattached by oneself and for oneself, without the satisfaction of placing the needs of another above the needs of the self, is a hollow sort of existence. The idea of a self-centered lifestyle as empty and frightening compounds when Rocco is under the spell of the veal. And he confesses the real reason for marrying Francine, which again is his terror at the prospect of going through life without a partner he can truly count on. Fear of facing life's challenges alone, aging alone, dying alone. In sum, the film presents the living by and for oneself option in regards to what one is to do about marriage and relationships. It presents the living by and for oneself solution as one that is fraught with spiritual emptiness and existential terror. The second lifestyle option presented in the film is, of course, the one advocated by the priest, adhering to the prescriptions of the Catholic Church and subscribing to an honest, faithful marriage. This path proves impossible for all characters in the movie. Of course, Rocco is entirely disinterested in such an ideal. We've already seen that he's marrying for self-centered reasons, but it is more subtle and more interesting to consider the fact that neither the priest nor Francine is able to rise to the lofty challenges of such an ideal either. So this week, I know we already saw this quote. As a young single man before his conversion, the priest realized that the root of his unhappiness lay in his inability to truly love another person and to put the interest of that person before his own interest. Ostensibly, then, the key to his happiness would have been the embrace of such an ideal. And what does he do? He becomes a priest. He renounces, human erotic relationships. What I believe is insinuated here is that, that challenge was too immense for him. He is not strong enough to love another person in this totalizing way. But on the other hand, we've already seen he's unhappy living by and for himself. The option that remains for him is the commitment of his life to a partnership with God. More about this in a moment. I just want to turn my attention over to the Francine character here. She too is ultimately unable to live up to the Catholic ideal of marriage, to which she is so drawn. In spite of her earnest desire to forge a marriage with Rocco, based on the Catholic ideals of total fidelity, total commitment to the other and to the partnership, we find in the film that her eye wanders lustfully over to the priest. In this exchange that I'm citing here, the priest is handing an envelope containing $500 to the waiter, Giuseppe, who will bring the money to Pasquale so that he will enchant the veal. And so I'm just quoting this little exchange here. The priest says, "Puoi dare questo a Pasquale?" And Rocco says, "What was that?" "I studied in Rome." Not the Italian, the dumb envelope. I always leave the tip in advance, just like in marriage. You should kiss your wife for 10 minutes before making love to her. Make love to her before making love to her. I studied in Roma. Francine's gaze betrays an enchantment with the priest in this exchange. His sophistication and worldliness, his intimate knowledge of romantic cities and languages, his surprisingly erotic and sensual ideas about lovemaking set Francine alight with wistful longing and tenderness. The priest appears to her like a distant dream, forbidden, erotic, impossible. He assumes an especially elegant relief in comparison to the crude beast of a man to whom she has tied herself. And so then, the Catholic ideal of loving another person unconditionally, committing unwavering fidelity to them, subordinating one's individual whims and urges to the good of the couple, emerges as impossible for all three characters in the film. If loving another person in this proper way, and this honest way, is impossible, what choice remains? The priest, as I implied earlier, seizes on the only remaining option, which is committing to a relationship with God. This, too, is not a commitment that the priest is fully capable of honoring. It is not just Francine who is fascinated by the priest. The priest is aware of the spell he has cast on the young woman, and he leans into it flirtatiously. Upon catching her enamored gaze when he completes his excursus on proper lovemaking, the priest winks suggestively at Francine, reiterating that he studied in Roma. Though it is subtle, he is fascinated by Francine's fascination. He takes pleasure in their quiet flirtation. As such, it cannot be said that he is fully committed to his relationship with God at the expense of all human relationships, all erotic human relationships. There is, it would seem then, no coherent solution in the cinematic universe of DJ Higgins, no good choice that one can make when it comes to the options he takes into consideration for one's love life. Every choice is a dead end. From here, and with what little time remains, I would like to move on to the second issue that Higgins treats dialectically in this film, and that is the issue of Catholicism versus vis-a-vis secular consumer culture. First, I submit that over the course of the film, Rocco becomes associated with a modern consumerist mentality, He is self-centered and clearly averse to a spiritual approach to life. Here we see him telling the priest that the church is bullshit and that he has no interest in there being any spiritual element to his marriage. He believes, furthermore, that material wealth is the ultimate source of happiness, as is evinced in this exchange here, where Francine complains about how Rocco is hostile to her, her religious life and her religious interests, and he simply responds to her with a list of expensive things that he's bought for her, as you can see here. Rocco embodies a way of thinking in which monetary wealth is the supreme good and nothing else is of any consequence. Finally, in this exchange, we see Rocco lost in his smartphone, detached from the issues at hand in this conversation they're having with the priest regarding human bonding, human relationships. He's detached from questions of ethics and intimacy. In sum, I propose that Rocco's disinterest in pondering the deeper questions of existence, his inability to build relationships, his raging materialism, and his short attention span, fed by an addiction to technology and social media, make him a sort of signifier for the modern consumerist ethos, which is clearly presented as something low and base and grotesque in this film. Catholicism presents as a preferable alternative to the consumerist model embodied by Rocco. This is evinced in the integrity of the priest's character, in the priest's ethos of altruism and selflessness. The spell that ultimately saves Francine from marrying Rocco is activated by the priest's recitation of the Ave Maria. The magic that saves Francine from Rocco and ostensibly saves her from the corrosive consumerist worldview that he signifies is Catholic magic. And yet the glaring inconsistencies and naivete of the Catholic solution appear consistently in the film. Its lofty prescriptions of total selflessness and total fidelity are too much for even the noblest figures to live up to. As we have already seen, the priest is unable to satisfy the impossibly rigorous Catholic requirements for devotion to another person, as well as devotion to God. Furthermore, the fact that Pasquale requires a $500 tip in order to perform a Catholic blessing on the Veal could well be a reference to the long history of profit-driven motives that lie beneath the surface of Catholic professions and institutions. Finally, the very fact of the film's premise, that the Veal possesses magical powers because of a Catholic spell performed on it, could be an admission on the director's part that Catholicism is rooted in fantasy. Magic, after all, is not real. I hope to have shown in this presentation that, at least based on this reading of Pasquale's Magic Veal, we can begin to understand the poetic itinerary of D.J. Higgins as one of dialectics and impossible dilemmas. I hope to have shown that he relentlessly lays bare the inconsistencies and inadequacies of every viewpoint that he considers in regards to the fundamental lifestyle and identity choices that he treats. And yet, I think it is so very important to recognize that this film, in spite of the discomfort it evokes, is a comedy. The tone, the dialogue, and the characters are designed to make us laugh, and I am confident that if you watch the film, which is available in full for free on YouTube, you will laugh too. This is where being one of DJ's closest friends becomes extremely useful in evaluating his art. Like the man himself, the art that Higgins produces sees only one way of confronting the insurmountable dilemmas and confusions that inevitably emerge from one's being in the world. This means of coping is best encapsulated by these words that the late Dario Fo once honored me with, and which I would like to use to close my talk. Ti auguro di arrivare a 90 anni come me con la forza e il coraggio della risata. Thank you.